Join me today as we pay our respects at our nation's most sacred shrine, Arlington National Cemetery. It is the final resting place of over 400,000 of America's military personnel and families, a number of Supreme Court justices, and 2 presidents. It is a must-see for student tours, and in this series I will show you the cemetery through this lens as we see what they see when I guide them. We will visit the graves of President John F. Kennedy and his brothers, see the changing of the guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier, spend time at the Memorial Amphitheater, investigate individual graves, and walk through its grounds. It is a magical space where even the most quiet of my student groups become filled with curiosity and questions, and I will share what I know with you as well as give a behind-the-scenes view of the trips. Take a look at the black sign on the way in, the one that says, "Conduct yourself with quiet dignity and respect at all times." Remember, these are hallowed grounds. Right now, we are going to make our way towards President Kennedy. But before that, I want to show you the house on a hill. That is Arlington House back there. And that was built by Martha Washington's grandson. And for a long time, this was a huge plantation. And this was really the only thing here was this house and various smaller houses related to the plantation. And the first burials here were people from the family who died. So they're basically buried on family land. And this only became a cemetery after the Civil War. So, before that, Robert E. Lee married into the family. So, of course, Robert E. Lee was the famous general who commanded the Southern forces during the Civil War. But he was actually a Union commander first. And just before the war broke out, before Virginia had seceded, President Abraham Lincoln asked Robert E. Lee if he would take over the Union forces for this war, which was sure to break out soon. And of course, what did Robert E. Lee say? He said no, and he left this house. He went further south to join up with Confederate forces. Now, in theory, in principle, Robert E. Lee was opposed to slavery. He was similar to George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who both were slave owners, but in theory, they thought it should be abolished somehow, some way. They didn't know how it would get done eventually, but they weren't comfortable with the system, but they still played by those rules in the end. So Robert E. Lee was like this, and he was a slave owner. But in theory, he believed in the cause of the North. He wanted slavery abolished. So why did he leave and join the South? And this is because his loyalties were deeper to the state of Virginia than they were to the United States as a whole. And in those days, this was a common thing to have your regional loyalties be stronger than national loyalties. So he said whatever Virginia does is what he will do. And when Virginia seceded, so did he pretty much, and he left. So the house was sitting empty at that point. And shortly after the war began, the Union took over this area first. So remember, we are in Arlington, Virginia. We are just across the river from Washington, D.C., back in that direction over there. And when they took over this area, they made the house a headquarters for the Union Army. And then later, it became what was called a freedmen's village. So when enslaved people escaped the South, they'd come up this direction, and there was basically a village there for enslaved people. And it was only after the war ended that they decided to make this a cemetery. So because of the war, the existing cemeteries in Washington, D.C. had filled up. There was really no more space. They needed space. And this area, again, it was twice the size of what it is now. It's huge now. They said this would be a great place to make a cemetery. So that's one, just the practicalities of the space. 2, they felt that Robert E. Lee had disgraced the property by abandoning his country and fighting for the enemy. So this was a way to bring honor back to the land. And there was actually a third reason, and this was that after the war, Robert E. Lee had expressed interest in moving back. And the powers that were really didn't want him moving back to his old house. So what would be a good way to discourage him from coming back? Well, you can make the land right around his house a cemetery for the enemy that he fought in the war. So they started by burying 26 Union dead all around Mrs. Lee's former flower garden. That was one. And just behind it, they also made a tomb of the unknown soldier for about 2,000 Union soldiers whose remains were recovered from the Battle of Bull Run, all into one tomb. So this pretty much entirely bones. They were recovered so much later on that it was just bones, and that's how they're able to get that many inside. And they also kind of portioned them in terms of bone parts to save space. So here you have 26 individual burials around the flower garden. You have a tomb of unknown Union soldiers, over 2,000, all here right behind the house. And this was enough to make Robert E. Lee give up on the idea of ever moving back, and he never did return. As time went by, the cemetery grew. At first, it was primarily Civil War burials, but again, as time went by, more soldiers were buried here as more wars happened. And especially after President John F. Kennedy was buried here, it really skyrocketed in popularity and really grew. And just a little bit more about the house itself up there. It recently underwent a massive renovation. So it had been kind of falling apart some time back. And when I first started as a tour guide in 2018, they were in the process of renovating it. And now it looks amazing inside. They've restored it to exactly how it looked when Robert E. Lee lived there. You do not need any kind of special tickets. You just show up and get in line, and you can do a self-guided tour of the house. You basically follow a flow of traffic, and you go into all of the different rooms, and then you come out of the back of the building. So that is really cool. When we have enough time on our trips, we will go up there and do that. But the thing is, the whole process takes a bit of time, because first they want to get great pictures in front of the house, and then they go inside and do the tour. And then there are bathrooms outside the house, outside at the back of the house. And there are some other exhibits at the back. There are former slave quarters back there and some other things. And it takes a little bit of an effort to get up there as well. It is a time eater. So really we have to be sure that we have the time to do it. And usually we don't. These student trips are so condensed. The trips generally last between 3 and 4 days. Sometimes it can be 1 day, sometimes it can be 5 days, but the majority are 3 or 4 days. And they are trying to do as much as they possibly can on these trips. So we kind of only have enough time to do the basics here at the cemetery. But every now and then we do have time to go up there, and it's always cool when we do. Something else I wanted to point out, there at the house, you can see that the flag is at half-mast. It's always like that, except on Sundays. And that's because when the cemetery opens, the flag is at full staff. And then at the beginning of the first burial of the day, they lower it to half-staff. And at the end of the last burial of the day, they take it all the way down. So unless you come here at the very beginning of the day, unless you're through the door like at 8 o'clock, you're probably going to see it looking like this. And there are no burials on Sundays, so it is at full staff on Sundays unless there is a special reason for it to be at half staff. So a question I often get asked by my students is why there is a number at the top. So this is the back of a headstone, and at the top there's a number. It says 31, and then there's a space, and then 2412. So this is basically an identification number so that if you were looking for a specific grave, you could easily find it. It's kind of like using the Dewey Decimal System at the library to find a book. So the 31 is section 31. The whole cemetery is divided into different sections. So you immediately know which part of the cemetery to come to. And then that number there, 2412, you see the grave right next to it, 2411. Basically, they're all in order. It would be pretty easy to find. Another question I get asked about a bit by the kids is why some of these graves have a cross with a circle around it at the top, such as this one. And then others, such as this one here, have just a cross with no circle around it. And the reason is that it's just a style choice. There's really no specific reason. It's just an aesthetic choice by the family. That's really all it is.